Alright, this is going to be a tutorial on how to play the Zerg vs. Zerg matchup. And Zerg vs. Zerg is really different than almost any other matchup in that it is incredibly low econ matchup. I mean, if you have 10, certainly 15 drones, you know, you're considered to have just a huge economy. I mean, that is a really big economy. And when you look at most other matchups, when they go into macro games, a big economy is going to be 70, 80 workers at least, if not more. So ZVZ is incredibly low eco, but the reason for that is pretty simple, in that it's if you go for any bigger eco, because it's a mirror matchup, you know, if you go for 3 extra drones and they make lings with that, all of a sudden they've got, you know, 12 lings to your 6 and you'll just outright lose. And, you know, people would ask, could you go Sunkens or something? Yes, but they're honestly not all that fantastic against lings. And plus, remember, if you go a Sunken, you lose a drone. So it doesn't work out. And plus, if you're spending all that money on Sunkens, you're not having any army to move out with. And you also run into the problem of it'll probably delay your Mutalisks, and it'll create issues with that as well. So in general, there's, and not to mention that if you have multiple bases, you can't really sunken up both of them. If you build a few Sunkens at one and not at the other, they can just run by and then go kill everything in your other base. So typical ZVZ build order, the one I'm doing here is fairly common. It's called an overpool, which means you get the Overlord and then your spawning pool. So you just build drones till 9, and then once you're supply capped at 9, you wait till you have 100 minerals, then you build an Overlord. And then when you have your next 200 minerals, you go ahead and build the spawning pool. And then right after you build the pool, you take your gas. Then you can usually make 2 more drones, maybe 3, depending on how it works out. You just have to, you want to make sure you have 3 larvae when the pool finishes. So you're able to build, and you're usually able to drone out back up till about 10 supply, and then you just stop. And then from there, you definitely want to make lings right away, because if your opponent's doing, you haven't scouted him yet, so he could be doing, you know, something like a 4 or 5 pool, which this will defend just fine. So if he's doing a really fast rush, you want to make those first 6 lings, because you need to be able to defend that rush, and you don't know what he's doing, so it only makes sense to be safe and make those lings. So you make those first 6 lings, you start mining gas right away. And the reason for the gas is that you want to get Mutalisks as quickly as possible. The reason for that being, in Zerg vs. Zerg, there's really no effective, so you can see with the first 100 gas I get Lair. And the reason for that is, in Zerg vs. Zerg, there's no effective counter to Mutalisks. You know, alright, you could get Hydras that do shoot air, but the downside to Hydras is they don't have very much mobility at all. So if you're a Hydra player, you're going to have a really difficult time taking extra bases. And to defend both bases, you could split your Hydras up and put them in the mineral lines, but then they'll just get picked off by the Mutalisks. Not to mention there's a range where you have neither Hydra speed nor Hydra range, which makes it incredibly hard to defend, and it's terribly inefficient. And also, if you're going Hydra Spore, you're much slower, and the other Zerg player doesn't have to worry about the mobility issues. So against a Hydra player, especially if he's getting spores, the Zerg player that's getting Mutalisks can easily take his second base, and will probably be able to take his third base pretty easily. And he can put up a few Sunkens, and he can just make... The other problem with Hydralisks that it runs into is the other player can transition into a Mutaling gameplay, and Mutaling absolutely destroys Hydralisks. So they don't work, and any other possible air counter takes too long to get. And getting spore colonies isn't a good option. Like, you might think, okay, what if I just get like spore colonies or something and tech to higher level air or something of the sort? But that also doesn't work out, because again, if you're spending all that money on spore colonies, you're not getting any sort of an army, which means the other Zerg player can safely expand, can safely drone up way more than normal, and he can just get a bunch of Mutalisks or a bunch of lings and overwhelm whatever you have. Because if you spend all this money on spore colonies, and then the other guy spends all his money on Zerglings, well, spore colonies don't exactly fight Zerglings very effectively, so you just end up losing. So for that reason, it's fast Mutalisks, so it's lings into Muta. And pretty much the safest way to play ZVZ is just to get lings until you see what your opponent is doing, and then just mimic what he's doing. If you see him continuing to make lings with your scouting Overlord, then you continue to make lings. And if you see him droning up, then you can go ahead and drone up. As you get better, you'll recognize times where, okay, he made lings here, but I can safely squeeze in a drone because of the distance it would take him to attack me. And you'll learn those things. But when you're first learning, the safest way to play it is just to go ahead and mirror what your opponent is doing. So You do the overpool, you get the Spire, or you do the overpool, you get your gas. Your first 100 gas, you get Lair. The next 100 gas, you get Zergling Speed. You absolutely want Zergling Speed, because if the other guy has Zergling Speed and you don't, he can cause all kinds of chaos for you, and he can totally out-position and outmaneuver you as well, because he has the speed. So he can easily set up a good attacking shape and beat you. So you want to get speed ASAP, and then as soon as the Lair finishes, you want to put down your Spire right away. And then you have different options. If you're playing Overpool, you can usually get a second hatch. Kind of depends on what your opponent's doing, and that's kind of up to the playstyle. But in most cases, you'll probably want to get a second hatch, simply because you'll have too much money to spend off just one hatch. So you can see here, the Mutalisks are out. I mean, this guy's going to lose, because what happened is this Zerg did a build called 12 hatch, which involves getting a hatch before pool at 12 supply and then the pool, and his Zerglings were just too late to defend mine, and he didn't make enough of them, so he just lost, and he doesn't have any way to deal with these mutas. But while I'm finishing out this game, you can see, oh, here, I'll talk about muta micro while I'm doing it. I do actually a pretty terrible job in this video, but what you do, you can see how here I'm moving my Mutalisk kind of in a circular motion, and what you do is you move them towards a target, and then when you're ready to attack, you hit H, which makes the Mutalisk shoot. It's for hold position. It makes them shoot, and as soon as they shoot, you turn them back the other way. Now, why do you do this as opposed to just letting the Mutalisk sit there? Well, the reason for it is by doing this, you wouldn't necessarily have to do this if you knew the opponent didn't have anything that could attack your Mutalisk, but if there's other anti-air units around, what this does is it allows you to come in range of only the closest ones, and it's because of the way the mutas work. As they slow down, they'll kind of come in range of more of your opponent's guys, whereas using this method, you can kind of get the maximum range out of the Mutalisks. And more importantly, if you stop your Mutalisk, he can just run his range guys under you and shoot with all of them. Like, let's say he's got a ball. Let's say it was, against a Terran player, and he's got a ball of Marines. He could take all those Marines, run them underneath your Mutalisk, and shoot with all of them. Whereas if you continue to micro, he'll only be able to shoot with his frontmost 3 or 4 Marines. So it allows you to take a lot less damage and be a lot more efficient. And the reason why you do this in CVZ is if the other person has Mutalisks and Scourge, you don't want to stop, because if you're stopped, he can hit you with his Scourge. If you're moving, you're able to use your Mutalisk. You can run away from the Scourge, and you can also use Patrol, and you can kill Scourge with Mutalisks. But if you're stationary, because the Mutalisks have to re-accelerate, they're very vulnerable to being hit by Scourge. So in general, in ZVZ, you want to keep your Mutalisks moving as much as possible. You don't really want to let them come to a complete stop at any point. So that's how I micro. I hit H. And the other thing I talked about is using Patrol. If you're against Scourge or something, what you do is you use P for Patrol, and you just click kind of just behind your Mutalisk, almost right on him, and then your Mutalisk will quickly turn around and shoot the Scourge, and then you rapidly click away as soon as they shoot, kind of like you would here. And the Mutalisks basically can turn and shoot, and they lose very little speed, so it enables you to take out Scourge quite efficiently. Okay, the other thing I haven't talked about yet was how to actually go ahead and micro Zerglings. And the way you do that is it's all about your arc and your positioning. In general, the best way to do it, you don't want to move your Zerglings. You certainly don't want to come in a line, and if you can avoid it, you don't want to come in a cluster. If you can, you want to have a slight concave so that all of your lings, when you attack, are attacking at once, and he's not able to attack with all of his. So in general, if you can get your lings moving in kind of a line before you attack, you'll perform a lot better in battles than if you just kind of A-move them and don't watch them, or certainly if you send them down in some sort of a conga line where they get picked off one by one. Because once again, it comes down to the concept of if you have just a few of your lings attacking at once, it's way less efficient, whereas if you are able to get them all attacking at once, you'll do way better. So you just want to kind of position them, spread them out, and try to put them in a slight arc, if anything. And that's really what it comes down to for Ling Micro. So the general flow of the game will be, you'll have a point where it's, you guys are both building Zerglings. One of you might decide to attack if you think you have an opportunity to break the other. And then at some point, shortly after, the Mutalisks will come out as both players put down their Spire and Lair. And then it generally turns into a muta versus muta battle, with eventually there's usually one big battle, and whoever has the most mutas ends up winning that battle, and then ZVZ ends. There's a little more to it, but that's the general flow.